So welcome back. In this particular video, we're going to continue our investigation into the GNS3 application by looking at some of the other toolbars, and we're going to continue building a topology and getting some of this stuff to work. So, that being the case, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm starting once again with a clean slate, and just to make things simple, we're just going to start with creating a topology with routers, nothing but routers. So let's just do a simple topology of 3 routers. And remember what I said? That when I drag and drop something, if I hold down the shift button, I can actually do more than one. So I'll just do 3 routers. So there we go. So I got a total of 4. Let's just make a nice topology out of that. Okay, so I've got 4 routers. Now, first thing to note is look in the upper right corner where it says topology summary. What is this telling us? Well, every device listed here is going to have one of 2 different colors. Well, actually, it could be one of 3. A red means it's not doing anything. It's stopped. It's sort of like you unplugged it and it's not powered in at all. When you turn the router on, and I'll just go ahead and do that, and I'll talk more about turning it on in just a second, then notice it turns green. So you'll see most likely red or green. Sometimes what you will see is yellow. Yellow is usually a transitory situation. It's usually like something's wrong, it's trying to start, but there's some problem. I haven't seen that a whole lot. And usually when it does turn yellow, usually if I just wait a few minutes, it will sort itself out and it will turn green. If it doesn't, if it just stays in the yellow state, what I would recommend is just right-click on that router, that particular router, delete it, and then try to drag and drop a new one in. And hopefully that will rectify the situation. So right now it shows me I've got 4 devices, 3 of which are stopped, not running at all, 1 of which is running. Now also something I want you to know. As you drag and drop these routers in here, notice that by default it names them R1, R2, R3, R4. They're just named in the order in which you drag them in. You can change these names if you want to. Now changing the name is just going to change the name on the topology diagram. It's not actually going to change the host name of the router. You would still have to log into the router to do that. But I can change the name here. I want to show you something. Let's compare the difference. First of all, I'm going to change the name of a router that's not running. So R2 is currently red. So I would right-click on R2. And the second item down is change host name. So I just select that. And I'll just type in San Jose and hit OK. And it changes the name. No problem. Now, what if I try doing that to R1, who's currently running? Change host name. How about San Francisco? Notice it does not change the name, and down here in this bottom window, let's see if I can display that for you a little bit. There you go. It actually says server error, unable to rename VM instance R1. So the takeaway from this is that there is no way to change the name of a router once you've started it. So if you want to change the name, and remember it's just the displayed name here in the topology, you have to stop that router and then change the name while it is stopped. And then it will let me change it. I'm going to leave the other 2 as they are. Okay. And also one other thing I wanted to mention. So that other window I just referred to down there at the bottom, down here, the console window. Most likely you're probably not going to need that for anything. Now don't let this get you confused. When it says console window here, this does not mean, oh, that must be the window I go into to issue my iOS commands like host name and enable password and IP address. No, that's not what that window is for. That console window allows you to provide command line commands to the GNS3 application itself. It's sort of like a window where you would type in DOS commands for your laptop or something. Chances are you probably don't know any of the GNS3 commands to type in here, and you probably won't need to. So this is usually when you're doing some sort of troubleshooting and trying to figure out on the back end what's going on with the GNS3 software, something weird is happening. So the only time I can really see you needing to go in there and type something is if you're working with like a GNS3 developer and they actually tell you what commands to type in there and they want to see what output comes out. But just for a regular GNS3 user who's trying to work with this, the console window really isn't going to do you much good. You're not really going to do anything there. It's really just going to be there to show you if there's errors. That's really what you'd be looking for in that particular case. You're not really going to type anything in there. Okay, so another thing I want to show you in this particular case. So far we've looked at the devices toolbar on the left. We've looked at the main workspace in the center. We've talked about the topology summary in the right, which is really just used to show you what devices are currently on and what devices are off. We've looked at the console window, which we don't really need to pay that much attention to. And the last thing I want to show you right here is this window right here, the server's summary window. What this is used for is to tell you how much of your current CPU and memory is being consumed by GNS3. Now right now you can see not a whole lot. My CPU is not being used by this because really nothing's running. I think all of my routers right now are turned off, so there's really almost no CPU usage being used by this. Now RAM, 54.9%. You might be thinking, well, wait a second. Why is half of my RAM already being used when nothing's been turned on yet? This is actually showing you sort of all the RAM you have. Not only the RAM that's being used by GNS3, but any other open windows you have or anything like that, which leads me to a very good point. Ideally, when you're using GNS3, in an ideal world, you're going to close down all the other applications on your laptop. Because remember, everything you have open, every tab you have open in your browser, your email program, your instant messaging program, they're all consuming memory. Vital memory that you're going to need for these routers. Because remember, each one of these routers, when you open it up, is going to take somewhere between like 128 megabytes, if you're lucky, all the way up to 512 megabytes for some of the 7200 series images. So that's going to eat up your RAM really, really quickly. So right now this is showing, I've got like 4 different windows open of Google Chrome right now. I've also got email open, Outlook. I've also got a chat program open. So right now, without GNS3 really doing anything, already 54.9% of my memory is already used. And once I start up these routers, let's see how that's going to affect things. Which brings me to my next point. How do I start up a router? Well, there's 2 ways you can do it. One way is you can just take a router and right-click on it. And you'll see here that if you scroll down about, 10 or 11 icons down is the Start button. And you can just click on that. And then if it successfully starts, it'll turn green over here. The other way you can do it is up in the top here in the GNS toolbar. If you take a look at this, if I zoom in, this says Start or Resume All Devices. So if you press that, and I'll go ahead and do that, all of your routers, actually everything that's in there, will turn on. Now by doing that, how did that affect my CPU and my RAM usage? See if I can get over there. Come on. I'm using 2 screens, so it's being difficult. All right, let's do this. I don't know if you can see it or not, but right now it says my local CPU. It's actually pretty good. It's fluctuating between 2.5 and 4%. My RAM has gone up a little bit. Previously it was like 59% of my RAM was used, and now 65.3% of my RAM is used. So, and in case you're wondering, this particular laptop I'm using has a total of 8 gigs of RAM. So between everything I have open right now, 65.3% is in use. Let me just go ahead and shut down some of my other applications that I don't need right now and see how that affects my RAM usage. So I just shut down my instant messaging program. That just shaved off 2 percentage points of RAM. Now I'm going to shut down everything I have for Google Chrome. So that's shut down. So that knocked off quite a bit, almost 10 percentage points of RAM right there. And as far as network devices, that's pretty much it. I've also got PowerPoint open, which actually consumes a lot of RAM. So let me go ahead and disable that. So now PowerPoint is closing. So it's from 52.9 or 53. We now go down to what? All right, so that saved a little bit, not as much as I expected. So it's now down to 52%. And I've also got a Microsoft Word document that's open right now. I'll go ahead and shut that down. All right, and I've got Microsoft Outlook up as well. Let's shut that down. So at this point, the only thing I have open and running is GNS3 itself with 4 routers that are currently up and active. And you can see, hopefully you can see, let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. You can see currently with 4 routers running and no other applications, it's using slightly over 1% of my CPU and about 47% of my RAM. Not too bad. Okay, so as far as this button up here, play or start all, if you've got, like I've got here, 3 or 4 routers, not a big deal to start them all. But if you've got larger topologies of like 7, 8, 9 plus routers, probably don't want to use the start all button. I haven't actually experienced this myself, but I've read a lot of websites and documents that said people actually did have problems with their laptop when they tried to start lots of devices simultaneously. So I would say as a general rule of thumb, if you've got 6 or more devices, it's probably better to just right click on them one at a time and start them up rather than starting them all at the same time. Now, how do I stop a device? Same type of thing. Right click on it. And then if I scroll down here, you can see there is the stop button, and that will stop it. Or I could go up here to the red box and stop everything all at once. And now it stopped. So that's pretty easy. We also talked already about how to do connections between these guys. So let me just go ahead and set up some fast Ethernet connections between them. Maybe a serial connection between these 2 guys. Another serial connection between these 2 guys. And we'll just leave it like that. And then press my link button again to stop that. Now, one other thing here about links that I want to mention is that unlike real physical routers, now let's think about this. If you've ever had any practice connecting real physical routers together or actually like in a remote lab or something, one of the things you've experienced, and if you haven't, the CCNA on up will test you on this, is that when you have a back-to-back serial connection between routers, one of those routers is acting as a DCE and the other is a DTE. And what does that mean? That means the DCE side is providing a heartbeat, or like what we call a clock rate, that the DTE side needs to lock onto. So when I've got a real back-to-back cable between 2 physical routers, one of them that's the DCE side has to be configured with the clock rate command. Otherwise, that interface either won't come up at all or it'll flap, go up, down, up, down. Well, here in GNS3, you don't have to do that. As soon as I start these routers, I can just no-shut those interfaces without inserting any clock rate command and it'll work. I've actually seen that GNS3 actually puts in a clock rate by default on both sides of the serial link. But even if you take that clock rate out, no problem, because it'll just come right up. No worries. Also, everything you see here, like the names, they can be dragged. So if they're currently in the way, you can drag them out of the way. Now you might be looking at this and saying, okay, but one thing that's sort of confusing here is I don't know which interface is connecting to which interface. Is this fast Ethernet 00 or 01 or something else? Well, here's a real quick and easy way to figure that out. Up here in the toolbar at the very top, notice this one right here, if I hover over it, says show/hide interface labels. So if I click on that, the interface names get displayed. Now, some of them don't line up very well. That's okay. Just drag and drop it into place so it's a little bit more visually appealing. So you're definitely going to want to do that. Click on that Show Interfaces button to keep track in your mind which interface is connected to which interface. What else can you do from here? All right, another thing I want to show you. a lot of times to make the topology more visually exciting, more visually illustrative of what you want to draw like circles and squares to represent like OSPF areas, BGP autonomous systems, stuff like that. So how would you do that? Well, that's here in this upper area. So this right here draws a rectangle. So if I click on it and just then click anywhere in my white space, there's a rectangle. And then I can just, sort of like in PowerPoint, I can drag it and reshape it. Now notice that by default, the shape, you know, think about this like if you have any experience with Microsoft PowerPoint, you know that as you put things on top of things, some of the stuff underneath can disappear. PowerPoint has this idea of layers, right? Where if you have a shape and then you put something else on it, the other thing will be on the top layer and this will be on the bottom layer. But with Microsoft PowerPoint, you can do like the send backward or bring forward option to change the layers. Well, you can do the same thing right here. Like right now you say, hey, where are my links? Well, the links are still there, but they're underneath this square. We can't see them. So what we want to do is we want to swap them around. We want to take this square here and lower it one layer so that the links are on top of it and we can see that. So just on the square itself, right click and select lower one layer. And now it's going to give you just a little notification. It's going to say, now you're going to have to right click on this to bring it up again if you want to move it. See, now that's on a lower layer, I can't, well, actually I can move it, which is kind of interesting. It is movable. So that might be an old message, but there it is. So, and I could also put in an ellipse or a circle. And just like the square, I can modify the shape of that. And notice right now that that's something new, so that ended up on the top layers, now overlaying the circle. So now I want to lower that one layer. There we go. What are some other things that you can do? We know that by default, when you save, anytime you do File, Save Project, it creates a picture of this, a PNG file. But let's say, for example, whatever reason you didn't want to save it right now, but you did want to create a picture. All right, very easy. Right here, this button, take a screenshot. So I'll just click that. And now it's asked me, where do I want to put the screenshot? So I'll just save it as current topology. And I'll save it to my desktop. And then I can save it. So that's just another way of creating a screenshot of your workspace right there. So that's to create a screenshot. As you can see, these buttons, like it sounds like, zoom in or zoom out to allow you to move around. You've got some scroll bars here if you want to center things a little bit better. And there's a few more things I want to show you on here. So what else can we talk about? Okay, so let's start up my routers as an example. I'll just start them all because I've only got 4 routers here to begin with. Okay, so they're all started at this point. Now, the moment of truth. How do I actually configure these things? I mean, I did all this because I want to practice the Cisco iOS command line. So how do I do that? Well, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Now, by default, GNS3 defaults to using PuTTY as its terminal, terminal application. So with PuTTY, every time you click on a router or an Ether switch router, it's going to bring up a new PuTTY window. And so you're going to end up with potentially lots of PuTTY windows that you're going to have to navigate around. In my particular case, I've already changed it in the background to use secure CRT so I can have tab ability. And I'll show you in another video. It's real quick to do that, but I'll show you another video how to do that. So basically, to get to your console, you can do one of two things. You can double click on a router. There we go. And notice how fast it is. I mean, there it is. I mean, if that was a real Cisco router and you powered it on, you'd be looking at 3 to 4 minutes of just sitting there and twiddling your thumbs while the iOS came up fully. But remember, you already decompressed this image when you inserted it into GNS3, so that speeded up this whole process. So here we are on the router. And notice like what I said before, what I said earlier. Even though when I right-clicked on the router and I renamed it, see, here's the name of the router, but it did not actually change the host name of the router. It still has the default host name of router. So by changing the host name by right-clicking, that just changed the topology image, didn't actually change anything else. So that's one way you can get into the router, is by double-clicking on it. There's two more ways you can do it. You can right-click on it, and if you right-click on it, now hold on a second, you might think, oh, configure, that's what I want. No, that's not what that is. That configure button, if you select that, brings up this. For example, you said, oh, when I put in this 3725, I actually wanted to put some wicks in there and I forgot to do that. Or I want to change the amount of memory it's using. Or change the image path name. You probably don't want to do any of that stuff. So it's not config. That's not what you want. When you right-click on it, you want to go to Console, and then select that. And that will bring up your console. So I said there were three ways. So far I've shown you two of them. Double-clicking the router, right-clicking it, and selecting console. And then, if you have, like I said, a fairly small topology like this, remember how I said you could start all the routers at one time with this green arrow and you could stop all the routers at one time with the red square? Well, guess what? This little icon right here, if I zoom in on that, console connect to all devices. If I press that, it will bring up a console window to every single device that I have simultaneously. And because I'm using Secure CRT and I've got set up for tabs, there they are. They all came up at the same time. And now I can start doing my lab work at this point. I can start configuring and doing whatever I want. And then when I'm done, just hit File, Save Project, save the current state, and I'll be finished. Now certainly there's a few more things I intend to show you in this video series, but at this point, if you just stopped right here and you walked away, you should be able to create a basic topology of routers connected via either Ethernet or serial. You know how to start them, you know how to stop them, you know how to open up console windows to get in there and start configuring, and at this point, you're good to go. But what are some things you don't know? Well, some things I'm going to show you in the future videos are, number one, switches. How do I insert switches into this topology, and what are my various options? I'll talk about that. What about WAN switching? For example, at the CCNA and the CCNP level, they want you to know about frame relay. And so you're going to want to get experience with Cisco IOS commands that relate to frame relay, which means you're going to need a frame relay switch. How do I do that? So those and a lot of other stuff are things I'm going to talk about in videos coming up in just a moment.